Okay, I think I'm going to get started here. Sorry if I'm distracted for a second. There's still people coming into the waiting room, so I'm trying to manage both. But I'm Dana Rubin. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll be your moderator for this session titled Thriving During Pandemics, Transforming Distress, Loneliness, and Panic into Post-Traumatic Growth Opportunities. We have 75 people right now in this session, which is fantastic. So thank you all for joining us. If you have found yourself in the wrong session, please go back to the conference homepage and search for the session that you are looking for. I am going to keep everyone muted until the end. We will have time for questions. Because there are so many people in this session, the preference would be for you to write your questions in the chat box, which I will see and manage. If not, you can raise your hand at the end. If you look on your participant screen, there will be a little sign that says raise hand. We are recording the session, so that will be available after the session for 60 days. And if you have any technical issues, again, go back to the conference homepage and submit questions on the tech button. So I am honored to introduce today's speaker, Jeffrey Janetta Work. Jeffrey is the owner and clinical director of the Center for Integrated Wellbeing in Roseville. He works as a holistic psychotherapist, educator, and consultant with almost 30 years of experience. Jeffrey has been a consultant and stress management trainer with the Minnesota Welfare to Work program. Additionally, since 1990, he has presented and facilitated distress management and self-regulation trainings in a wide variety of settings. Some include the following: Adler Graduate School, St. Paul SCORE, IBM in Rochester, Lakeview Hospital, Minnesota State Operated Community Services, William Mitchell College of Law, Century College, autism conferences, and professional psychological associations throughout Minnesota. So welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you. All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm thrilled to be with you, and we have so much to cover. Please put on your helmets. We're going to be moving relatively quickly. And I have to admit, this is the first time that I have done a Zoom teaching with this many people, and it's amazing, the technology. So thank you, Dana, for helping, and everybody else who's making sure that this is working so beautifully. It's really great. I will post my email in the chat box at the end, and phone number, hopefully. So if you have questions, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to help you if you have things that you need more information on. The composer and musician Billy Joel said that these are not the best of times, but they're the only times I've ever known. And I believe there's a time for meditation in cathedrals of our own. Perhaps these are troubled times. And I think that stepping into our own inner cathedrals with some awareness and some skills and some patience can assist us in bringing about better times. And my intention is to teach you skills and help you with your awareness so that you can do just what I said. We have almost 900,000 people who are unemployed as of last week in this country. We have numbers of people who have suicided greater than we've had ever before. We have 8 million people who have been infected with COVID and 225,000 people who have died. This list goes on into the environment, into politics, into racial injustice and violence. So I think we're living in very stressful times. And I'm convinced that managing our stress and dealing with our trauma and our grief is essential to the well-being of everybody on the planet and the planet itself. With all this stress, do you ever feel like you're diagonally parked in a parallel universe? Some people do. Some of my clients have talked that way. The Chinese proverb, which I use a lot in my work, says, it's not what happens so much that's important as what we do with it. And when we take a look at the stresses that we have and the challenges that we have, how we interpret what the world gives us can either make it really devastating or actually an opportunity. And we'll explore how that works today. I'm so glad that we have 5 hours to do this piece of work together. And we're going to condense 5 hours into well, like 45 minutes because we'll do some Q&A too. Let's talk about the difference between healthy stress and distress. Now, there's a handout that I was told that you would have access to, and it looks like this. And if you don't have it, no problem. Raise your hand if you actually do have it. Okay, no problem. It's called Mastering Stress, Isolation, and Loneliness. And at the top, I'm going to read the definition of stress that I'm working with here. An external stimulus or series of stimuli which impact a person's perceptions. We use the perceptions to the point of either enhancing or disturbing our mental, psychological, emotional, physical, spiritual well-being. And in a way, what that says is, again, how I perceive the situation can either impact me in those different ways, in a distressing way or in a positive way. And I will explain that in just a moment. Healthy stress is called eustress. Eu is Greek for good. And eustress looks like I'm excited with a little bit of nervousness, but I'm not anxious. That's different than distress, which is I'm not excited, I'm more nervous, worried, scared. And it activates us in a way that we'll talk about in just a moment. Distress usually overwhelms us, overloads us, and challenges us psychologically, mentally, again, spiritually, physically, on a variety of levels. And it can lead to incredible health challenges. I'm sorry that you didn't get that handout because some of the health elements are listed in there. If you're interested in getting the handouts, and there's 3 of them, you can email me or put your name in the chat box and say, please send that to me, and I'm happy to do that. So stress, here are just a few of the areas where stress and distress come into our lives. Environmental chemicals, toxins, viruses like COVID-19 comes through the water and the soil and the air that we breathe, relationship tensions, battling gravity, battling stress, major injuries, joints that kind of fall apart, homelessness, nutritional insecurity, being accosted by police and people in power positions, death of loved ones, the list goes on. And I am not exhaustive in that list, but I want you to know that it's, life gives us gravity, whether or not we stand erect and manage it pretty well, or when we bend over, our system says, I am distressed. So what we do with it will make it distressful. Once again, the Chinese proverb. If you do have a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and you want to write down some of your top stresses or distresses, great. We'll do a little bit of exercise. We're going to do exercises where you can apply those techniques to your stress levels. So having that list can be useful. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine too. The second handout is called 3 Outstandingly Useful Stress Reduction Exercises. And I'm going to teach those skills right now, so you won't need the handout. If you want to take notes on what I'm teaching, that's great. Again, you can get the handout from me later if you wish. The first technique is called diaphragmatic breathing. It's also called deep breathing. It's also prana breathing, goes back 2,000 years to India. You've seen variations of this. It's incredibly useful. And research shows through EEGs that if you do this technique 3 times a day for 2 weeks, your brain waves will slow and you'll report less annoyance, irritation, anger in particular, and less anxiety. So this is a wonderful technique that I really want you to know. And you can do it anywhere, a board meeting, sitting at the table, at work, or in your car. if you wish, although that's not the best place. So it's very useful. And here's how it goes. We have two primary ways of breathing in the human form. One is through the lungs. We notice that the chest raises, the shoulders raise a little bit when we breathe into the lungs. The other is when we breathe in the lower portion of the lungs into the lower part of the body in the torso, and our diaphragm relaxes and expands moving out. Makes us look a little fat, and that is an inhalation of a natural process. As a matter of fact, when you lay down at any time, your breathing goes to your diaphragm area and you breathe, the tummy comes up and down instead of the lungs, because the diaphragmatic breathing is more efficient for the human body. So we're going to maximize that. It also massages viscera very nicely, brings in fresh oxygen. It does beautiful things for the system. And so if you want to put a hand on your chest and a hand on your tummy and breathe in deeply and see which hand moves more, the hint is your tummy is going to want to come out and the shoulders are going to be quiet. And I'll show you what that looks like. Looks like this. So when I inhale, the tummy comes out. And then when I exhale, I bring the belly button to the spine just a little bit, which moves all the air out so I have more air to take in. And the technique is a breathing pattern that goes inhalation for 6, hold for 4, out for 8. And you're going to say, why 8 versus 6? Because the central nervous system has two primary modes. One is the gas pedal, which is your sympathetic nervous system. And that activates the system. When you breathe in, it kicks in. And then you can do a physical activity after you've gone. The parasympathetic is the brake pedal, digest and rest. So that kicks in when we exhale. So the more we exhale, you're actually squeezing out more parasympathetic activation and rest for the system, which is why we inhale for 6, hold for 4, out for 8, which is longer. So I'm going to model it. I'm going to ask you to do it with me and see how you're feeling. So hand on the tummy if you want, and if not, that's fine. And it's an inhalation for 6. I'll show you what it looks like one more time. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold for 4. Out for 8. Feel free to do it with me. Inhale for 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold for 4. Out for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time if you wish. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out for 8. One of the reasons this works, beside the mind-body connection, is partly because we're focusing on something that is not the irritant that bothers me. If we take the mind off of the irritant, the system starts to calm down. And I'm going to give you a model that you can see, which will educate these pieces, put them together, I hope, in a really good way for you. And I spared no cost in bringing you this model. And the model is basically, if I'm calm, cool, and collected like a little Buddha, where my shoulder meets my body. And at the end of the fingertips, I'm completely out of control. And that means irrational, beyond panic, I'm into terror, and I'm not making any choices that are rational. Humans don't go 0 to 100 instantaneously. We work the system by going stress, distress, panic, don't know what to do, feeling a little hopeless, and it gets worse. And then it feels terror, which is basically a little bit of hopelessness plus incredible anxiety. And then we're completely out of control. What we want to do is learn to have skills with awareness and manage in the zone where I pull myself back so that I don't have to spend time going up here. You'll never have a panic attack if you know how to catch it early and bring it back. So the model is nice because you've always got the arm with you. The techniques you can use, you can assign to a finger, which I'll teach you. So you always have them with you. People should have between 5 and 6 skills basically that work all the time. So hopefully by the end, you'll have at least 3, probably 4 if we have time. So that was the breathing technique that I taught you. In for 6, hold for 4, out for 8. If you do that 3 times a day for a full week, actually 12. So in, hold, out is 1 set. Do between 12 and 15 sets 3 times a day, and it'll be very helpful for you. Second technique is called heart rate monitoring. And this is beautiful because it takes my mind off the thing that bothers me. It also gives me time to calm down. What happens in the brain and the body, if my whole, from the neck up, you look at it as a house. If I'm in the attic, I have a place where I'm calm because the prefrontal cortex here is really the place where I can think about how to manage things, and I'm understanding things well and on top of my game. Once I start to be activated in the midbrain, which is where the amygdala is, which is the alarm system for fight, flight, freeze, and annihilate, then I'm going into nervous, worried, scared, and panic. So second floor is where the activation is, but the blood shunts from prefrontal cortex down to second floor to feed what's happening. And I'm not really functioning very well. Like short-term memory is off. I'm just not thinking very clearly, not rational to the fullest extent. So what we want to do is use our skills so that we can calm things down mentally and the blood flow returns so we can manage. So when we do our stress management techniques and our calming and self-regulation techniques, we are doing a lot of mental work. So the awareness plus skills from a mental perspective, as well as relaxing the body. So we calm the mind, relax the body. Either one will get you to a better place. The two together are much better. Second skill is called heart rate monitoring. And to do that, there's 2 ways to do that I like to teach. If you take the edge of your thumb and you drop it down to where your hand meets your wrist and you pull it forward a fraction moving forward in front of you and 2 fingers up and down, and then you drop the arm so that the wrist is below the elbow so the blood can flow down, you should feel a pulse there. Again, where the thumb meets the wrist, 2 fingers and then slightly forward, and then drop the wrist lower than the elbow. The second way is where the back at the edge of the jaw, drop it straight down where the neck meets the skull, move it forward just a tiny little bit, 2 fingers up and down, and you should get it there too. Refrain from using your thumb, it has a pulse of its own, and we don't cross over the throat. So take your pulse, find your pulse in one of those 2 ways, and we're going to go for 6 seconds. The first pulse that you feel is going to be 0 when we count them. So when I say go, you're going to go 0, 1, 2, 3. So find your pulse, and I'll tell you when to start and stop. On your mark, get set, go. And stop. Add a 0 to whatever number you got. If you're highly caffeinated, you're on certain meds, it's going to be higher than 75. If you run a lot and you have good ticker, it's going to be lower. The beauty of this technique is that my mind goes to something other than the fact that I'm really stressed about that thing over there. And it gives you a chance for the blood flow to come back. If you need more time, you can do simply a 60 second heart rate check. So you can look at the clock for a full minute, count the number of pulses, and that'll give you a more true reading and more time to distribute the blood flow. So that's heart rate monitoring, which I think is really useful as well. Number 3 is we borrow from cognitive psychology. It's called cognitive reframing. And if in my mind, this particular stone represents a thought, like, gosh, I wish my son would call me, and he hasn't for a long time. So I'm really, psychologically, the frame I put around this thought is negative. Maybe it feels like rejection, a little anger, confusion. And so the frame to hold this thought, it's not very positive. And so it's got little cracks in the paint and splinters are coming off. It's made of a wood that's really ugly, but it's what I've got right now. So we take this frame and we get rid of it. And then we put on a frame which is, different. I'd say ebony would be really pretty, polished, really nice. So I'm thinking more positively about the same thought. I'm framing it in a positive way. Oh, it's a spiritual opportunity for me. He's only being an adolescent. Yeah, I just have to be patient. It'll work. We have a great foundation. It's okay. So while I'm reframing all of this, my prefrontal cortex is getting some blood flow back because my alarm system is not activating so much from the amygdala. So I'm doing myself a favor and calming down my system by changing my perception. And because perception governs reality, I perceive that dog as threatening. Now my whole system's activated. My perception governs my physical reality and I change my behavior. It impacts things around me. So that's a reality that we have to deal with. So cognitive reframing or reframing is a really sweet way to shift the mind so that we have better blood flow and we come down with our stress levels, but we go back up to the first floor, to the attic, I should say, and we're coming back to the calmer place. Actually, those are the 3 techniques I wanted to teach you. And what you can consider doing is taking the list of the 3, however many stresses that you listed and rating them 0 to 10. And then on your own, going through each of those techniques and see before and after. So my level 8 is about this issue. I do my breathing and now I'm a 4. That's great. But maybe I'm a 5 after I do the reframing. So practice with those and see how that feels. Whew, we're moving on. I want to talk about external stress versus personal stress. The personal stress, the definition that I read is really a personal stress response. It's a way of framing how we deal with personal issues. The dog looks threatening. I'm activated. This is my stress. Sometimes there's external events that happen which impact us and can also be, it's more than just my frame on this. I've got to do something about it, and it impacts maybe other people as well. And so COVID-19, influenza, death of loved ones, family members who are acting stupidly, things that are happening around us that we don't have a lot of control over. This becomes more of an external stress. And the thing about anxiety is, the thing about stress and distress, I referenced that it's about fear, phobia, it's fear, anxiety, scared. So the base is fear. And when we have fear, we want control because it allows me to feel like everything is okay and blood flow comes back to the attic. So the more control I have, I'm probably managing things pretty well. So if we can feel a sense of control by doing things, techniques, awareness, we're going to feel better. This is why putting on a mask makes us feel like we're preventing ourselves from dying from COVID-19. So what do we want to do when we have external stresses? We want to gather resources and people and see if we can make change together. We can work on the part of our own stress response that we're responsible for. We can let go of things that don't work. We can pick our battles. We can adapt or perish into a level of denial and wallow in angst. And that's our choice, although it doesn't feel very good. And we can also ask, what control do I have in this situation? And if I can say, well, I have control over how I perceive things, then I'm going to change my perception. I have control over asking these people to do something differently. Okay, maybe I can do that. So asking the question, what do I have control over, can be very helpful as well as those other things. The poet Rumi said, love is the bridge between you and everything. And what I find is if I'm in a place where I'm feeling compassion or love, I probably am moving closer back to zero than I am activating. And so bringing compassion to myself and to other people, coming from a place of a loving sensibility, are all ways to feel a bit differently and allow the flow to come back to the addict, to the prefrontal cortex, if that makes sense to us. For some people, it won't, and that's okay. The difference between distress and fear and panic and trauma and loneliness. Let's take a look at that. I'm defining fear here as an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous and likely to cause pain or threat. And that's Merriam-Webster dictionary. And the two words in there, belief and danger, because I perceive that dog as dangerous, I'm feeling afraid. Again, if I can interpret things so that they don't have that same fear response in me, and I manage the fear response, or I act even with the fear response, which is called courage, then I'm taking some control over the situation, and the chances are that I can calm down my mind and relax my body, and that will help me start to feel a little bit better. So if you're going through a surgery, or you're going to go through a surgery, or have a baby, there's some ways to think about how to change these perceptions. Number one, interpret things slightly differently. So for example, instead of calling it pain, if we call it pressure, like if we're going to deliver a baby, if it's discomfort instead of pain, because pain is associated psychologically with things that maybe carry trauma for us and lots of historical upset. And so if we can shift that perception, it softens a little bit. We can interpret things as an opportunity, a chance for change or transformation. When you are given lemons, you make lemonade. Panic, defined as sudden uncontrollable fear or anxiety, often causing wildly unthinking behavior. So this is where the midbrain gets activated in the alarm system. And panic really is that sense of, I really have no idea what to do now. And I have seen in my practice that people with panic attacks don't have a lot of skills, because I say, how do you manage your stress? And they say, well, whatever. So I'm convinced that if we manage and we're aware and we use good skills, we can prevent a panic attack, unless you've got something happening which is really a neurobiological or medical condition that's causing such challenges. But by and large, we want to control the emotions through, again, interpretation, our skill sets. What do I know historically helps me return? I can rely on that. There's confidence in that. Prevention is always the key. So keeping myself regulated. Maybe my meditation practice that I do daily helps bring me back. So the frame I'm using to see the world, my interpretation, again, reframing. Positive self-talk. I know I can do this. I've done it before. I've used those 4 skills before. They always work. No problem. That helps us find confidence and calm down. Trauma. Trauma historically has been around a very long time. The Greeks called it the following: a stabbing wound-like feeling of an arrow or a spear or a knife, and there's a level of violence penetrating the body. Very graphic. That's what it was like to them, referred to as a wound or a hurt or a defeat. And then in 1894, we had the psychological piece added, which is a sense of psychic wounding, an unpleasant experience which causes abnormal stress. So trauma is like, now I'm in the basement. If you take a look at my hand and you think this is the head and the neck, the attic is up in front, and then we have the second floor I talked about, and the third floor would be the primal brain, where we have we're really interested in sleep and procreation and survival. And then we have subcortical below, and we have trauma which resides quite deeply in the system at times. It's very difficult to deal with trauma when we're in the prefrontal cortex. So talking about it doesn't really work. Using language, which is a prefrontal cortex element, doesn't really get trauma when it's held down here. So trauma, which resides in the neurological system, you don't get at by talking about it or the incident. You have to treat it in a different way. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. I'm just letting you know that trauma is its own beast because it's held in the neurological system. And there are different forms of trauma that we want to attack or tease out and heal in different ways. Some single incident traumas can be things like life-threatening accident or a rape or natural disaster, family members being in a Holocaust or a cult or a group, a gang. Some examples of repeated trauma would be a molestation or torture or even neglect, which goes on and on and on. And so we can have multiple layers of trauma, which sometimes take a while to heal. So very often after a trauma, we have shock and denial, and we have a sense of unpredictability, not feeling safe, and not knowing when things will happen again. And so we protect ourselves psychologically, or we say, I don't want to deal with that, and I don't want to deal with anything that even looks, smells, or acts like that issue. And so very guarded and defendedness can arise. And so trauma can impact us and relationships incredibly. And so it's delicate, but really important to address the trauma and move it out of the system. Here's just a few forms of trauma. The list is long. I'm just going to give you a few. We have community violence done to an entire community, which can be very traumatic. Complex trauma, which is multiple traumas happening again and again and again for quite some time. Collective trauma, ancestral trauma, natural or environmental trauma like a tsunami, travel trauma, Trump trauma for some, physical abuse, neglect, and being a refugee and going through experiences like that. So trauma is a different type of stress, but I want to put it in here because it's really important to be aware of. Collective stress happening to a large group of people or many people can impact not only the person, the relationship between a few people, the entire group. It can change some of the, Eric Erickson talked about this, change the fabric of the community. It can also alter the policies and the ways that the laws are structured in society. If we take a look at war, natural disasters, mass shooting, terrorism, pandemics, systemic and historical oppression, famine, poverty, all of these things can impact an entire group of people for generations. And just a few ways to consider dealing with that level of trauma. It sounds trite, but voting, being educated, pooling your resources, figuring out how to stabilize the systems that have influence over us. If you need to relocate, great. If you need to start a movement like Black Lives Matter or something like that, fabulous. Jewish Family Children's Services and many organizations around the world have been started partly because of the stress and the trauma of groups of people, pulling resources together to support the next generations. Coming together with community, with family, doing healing individually, doing healing as a group, even prayer work, ritual work, community work can be very helpful. Existential trauma, when we're dealing with issues of life and death, sense of presence with the gift of life, questions about where I'm going when I'm not going to be here, when we're impacted at the level of, I may be dying. I might have to die in this process. This is a type of trauma which is relatively unique. And one of the theories talks about what's what they reference as neocortex. Sorry, they reference it as neophobia, meaning when something happens that is too much, what I'm going to do is I don't want to deal with it in the attic and the prefrontal cortex, and it's too much to feel. I'm going to suppress it in the subcortical down low, and I'm going to let it sit there and percolate. We're going to talk about that because that can be part of people acting out their trauma without taking responsibility for it. Because if I'm not aware of it and it's in my unconscious subcortical, I'm not responsible for that. So they perpetrate on to other people expressions of trauma without knowing it. This is basically dissociation. It's not that's not me. And this would be like in the movie Hotel Transylvania, when the little monster suddenly just inhales everything on the table and all the food, and no one's going to get any, and they just eats it, and then he sits there and says, I didn't do that. So the denial of what you're doing and the impact on other people is associated with that level of it's not me dissociation. And I have an example from my clinical practice, and this just happened the other day. And this is a true-ish story, changed to protect the innocence of my client. She is a successful attorney, public defender, and she's always hated her biological mother because of the way that her mother made fun of her, swore at her, treated her, beat her. And so my client now does not admit that she has any behaviors which are similar at all to her mother. But just recently came out that she was accosting her partner and threatening her partner. And so when we explored this, my client said, well, I can't wait until my mother dies. And I fantasize about taking 2 knives and cutting off her head. And the level of violence that has been relatively dissociated until these conversations is an example of a neophobia. I don't want to deal with it. I'm not ready. I'm going to dissociate, forget it. But it comes out and it impacts her relationship with family. And it's very, very stressful for everyone. And so what we need to do, what we're doing, and what people need to do when they carry this level of trauma is tease the trauma out enough so that it can become expression through the limbic system, which is where emotions are, in midbrain, and then interpretation, responsibility taking. And this is done gradually. And I'll tell you the way that I think it's best done, not by talking, again, because prefrontal cortex is where language centers are, and you're not going to get that depth of trauma out by talking about it. So it has to be a gradual process. Sometimes dream interpretation is important, sometimes movement, sometimes doing feeling identification is important. And the ways that I think to heal those traumas, including other general traumas, I use EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, and you can look that up, and that's very powerful. Also, I use brain spotting, which is a relatively new technique, but super powerful, and I'm certified in that, and I've been using that for 2.5 years. And then we have techniques that have to do with the connection between the mind body, also like thought field therapy and energy psychology techniques, somatic psychotherapy, things that help us get in the body, which holds so much of trauma in its own right and the emotions associated with trauma. Good quality psychotherapy. I would even say hypnosis is a beautiful way to help deal with these traumas. So trauma-informed psychotherapy in a variety of these ways, I think, is really important. I'm going to trust that those who want to learn a little bit more about isolation and loneliness will email me, and I'm happy to send the handout that has some really nice explanations, really good techniques to use, and also resources, both texts and online. If you want to learn more about dealing with isolation and loneliness, the techniques I'm teaching today can be helpful to ease some of the angst related to isolation and loneliness, though it's going to take behavioral change and social connection and trust and going out and connecting with people to really help with some of that. If you have your list of things which are stressful for you, and if you want to add anything having to do with trauma, that's great. And when you think about those things, we want to be a little more aware about where in the body we're holding the stress. How does the stress manifest itself? So for example, if I get irritable or cranky or short with people when I'm stressed, that would be important for me to know. Partly because I can say to my friend, would you let me know if I'm being short and cranky and whatever? Because, I have this presentation to do to over 70 people. And I've never done a Zoom call before. So, I'll take responsibility for that. Perhaps it's low back stress. Perhaps it's agitated sleeping. There's a variety of ways that stress impacts our bodies. A lot of times stress, which activates the system to give what a blast of glucose to our muscles, it activates the muscles in a way that we get sore and we get tight. And that's kind of a muscular expression of tension and stress. But it's good to know and to educate yourself a little bit about how you are expressing, how your body's expressing your own stress and your own tension. Because when I'm aware, oh, there's that low back feeling again, I can stop and say, oh, I wonder if, I'm stressed about da 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 or whatever, and be reflective. Again, this is the awareness piece. And so when we bring the awareness and the listening to the skill sets, we want to ease back when we can, as we can, to the calmer place, because we're just less functional and less happy the farther we go. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about, we have just a few minutes left. Wow, nice. I'm going to skip that part. Some perspectives on supporting your mental health care. If you know that you're triggered in a stress reaction or into a traumatic reaction and you don't know what to do about it, you're kind of in trouble. If you don't know that you're triggered, but you're behaving that way, you're also in trouble, and maybe someone's going to point it out. If you catch the fact that you are triggered and you understand it, but you're doing things which aren't really solving the problem, you're helping yourself in a way that helps you deal with your stress, but it doesn't really bring you back to a calmer state, or it doesn't really solve the problem longer term. Like, when I'm emotionally stressed, I look around for chocolate, and I can eat all the chocolate I want, but it's really not going to go to the heart of the issue or resolve the cause of the stress. So it's good to ask yourself, what is the root of my stress? What is the real issue here? And is it something I have control over? And what is it that I can change? And is it something I'm willing to do? And that's a personal question, but I think it's important because you can either work on the symptoms or you can go to the root cause. Longer lasting is going to be the root cause. And sometimes we see things we don't want to deal with, but that's okay. I can say that because I'm a therapist, and that's what we do. We help people with that. Again, the parasympathetic system is the tend and befriend, rest. And so the more we are exhaling or calming or using ways to activate the parasympathetic system, it's beautiful. It's really good. We'll talk a little bit more later, if we have time, about the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic system are connected. And when we activate the vagus nerve, it calms the system down. And I'm going to be offering a 2-hour class in November on the 7th. And we're going to do exercises which are related to the vagus nerve. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'm happy to help you sign up for that. So we want to go beyond just being smart about these things. We want to use them. Some people are wise, some are otherwise. We want to be wise to the point of using things that help us. Then we talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth opportunities, because this is like reframing on steroids. This is a body of research coming out of positive psychology, which basically says human beings can interpret things in a way that help them come back to a more calm state and basically find the opportunity to grow or insight or healing in whatever arises. And during the times that we're going through, I think this is really useful. And there's 5 primary realms where post-traumatic growth opportunities can kick in. So if I'm going through an experience, here are the 5. And if you want to write them down, great. The first one is developing a sense of new opportunities that arise from the struggle. So doing this presentation with you on Zoom is a response to COVID. I educated myself on how to do it, and here I am. I wouldn't have done it had COVID not arose. So new opportunities emerge. Let's take them and apply them. Number 2, I may be experiencing my relationships in a new way or a more helpful way because of the challenge that I'm going through. Perhaps, you know, my dog just died and I've got one friend who shows up and is just amazing, and they support me in a way that I've never experienced before. Number 3, increased sense of your own strength. It's amazing what you can find within when you need to. I can tell you that from personal experience. Being able to run in the water and swim like a fish and do a bunch of stuff after spinal surgery. Traumas allow us to find our strengths. Number 4, having greater appreciation for life in general. This might be humility. This may be gratitude. This may be appreciative awareness because of going through something, and it opens us up at that level, and that's a real gift as well. The 5th one is deepening our spiritual perspective or our belief systems. And the lens, if we use a lens of the spiritual when tragedy happens, then it can inform us for other areas of our life. The old statement is, we don't really think about God until there's a tragedy. For some that's true, for some it's not. I want to move to a bit of summary before we do some question and answer. And the one thing that I think is really important is control. Everybody wants control when they're anxious. But the fact is, there's only 3 areas that we have control over in our life. Everything else, we don't. And those are the following. Number 1, thoughts come in our heads. What we choose to do with them, we can choose by choice. And that's assuming we don't have brain damage and dysfunction. Number 2, emotions arise within us. We can express them, amplify them, or not. So we have a choice on what we do with the emotions that arise. And number 3, if we have the capacity to move physically, then we can impact the world and physically move when we choose. We can get up and leave when the conversation doesn't fit us if we want. Other than that, we don't have a lot of control over what happens. So I use it as a perspectivizer so that we can make choices that really work for us. The next thing I want to mention is, remember that Chinese proverb? It's not what happens, it's what we do with it. It's how we perceive it. And since, since I'm a certified laughter yoga instructor, one of the things that we talk about is having laughter Because when we laugh at a situation, we take our power back from it. Otherwise, it pretty much owns us. And if it's a stress or a trauma or something that just drives us crazy, we're putting a lot of energy into it. So where can we step back, detach, change the perception, use our skills, have a good laugh or a good cry, and then deal with it in a different way?
Jeffrey, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. We've got about 5 minutes left. I don't see any questions right now in the chat. So I'll let you wrap up. And if there's any questions, please feel free to ask them, preferably in the chat, but if not, raise your hand. The handout is on the homepage of our the conference website. Jeffrey, is your contact information in that in the handout?
Let's see. It is not.
Okay, we will get Jeffrey's contact information. And if there is any questions, Jeffrey, do you mind if I interrupted right there? And
Great.
good.
No problem.
I got a question. What's the difference between anxiety and depression?
Nice question. For me, anxiety has to do with what I'm anticipating on some level or afraid of, which is present moment moving forward. I don't know if I'm going to do a great job in this Zoom call, so I'm really nervous about it. Hasn't happened yet, but I'm nervous about it. Depression, and there's different ways of talking about this. We could get into the neurochemicals or we could get into psychological. If it's depression, I probably have something from the past that's really just like, really down. If my neurochemicals are off, I can be depressed. So it depends on how you want to look at it. I know that's cursory, sorry. You also know how it feels. Agitated, nervous, worried, scared feels really different than hopeless, bummed out, and lethargic and no energy.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jeffrey. Other questions?
Anita, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, I came to your talk a little late, but I sure relate to the things you have said, particularly regarding laughter. And I feel like I was preparing for the COVID challenges through the medical crisis and death and grief of my late husband. So even when I went through really tough times, like in the emergency room of the hospital, when I could find humor, like when I saw myself, I'm an artist and I draw, when I could draw myself as Nurse Nita, who could like cope with anything or go out and dance, then I could deal with it. And the same thing with COVID, I've actually had a lot of playful reactions to some of it, like arguing with COVID, telling it I want it to go away, the relationship is over, and just finding a playful humor. And I would also add that in the wake of grief of losing my husband, I used art to dialogue with him. And then I also found humor there. Like he would come down, he would say something very practical, like, enough emotions, Anita. If you check the oil on the car, so I just loved what you said about, stepping back. When one finds the humor, one has a powerful tool in the face of trauma, anxiety, and despair.
Thank you so much for that, Anita. And I'm sorry for your loss. And I was going to talk about grief, and I love talking about grief. And if you want to talk about grief, email me and we can talk about grief. Yeah.
I would love to, and I'll make sure I get your email address will be sent out somehow.
Well, I put it on the chat. It's the very top of the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And if not, we will also make sure you all get it. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to try and share on my screen something that I'd like to share. And Dana, you're
2 minutes left.
Okay, help me do this, Dana. When I click on the share, how do I get to my desktop?
Do you have the document you want to open? Is it open on your desktop? The document you want?
Yes.
So if you share screen, it should
Yes.
come up with the choices of things that are open, and hopefully you'll see that on your screen.
Yeah, I only see a few things that aren't what I want, but that's okay. I will mention it verbally, and I'll open it so I can give you the details. November 7th, an online opportunity for 2 hours between 9 and 11 a.m. for me to further the conversation and to teach the vagus nerve activation that I want to teach you, because it's very useful, really easy. You're going to laugh how easy it is, but very helpful. We're going to talk about mindfulness and the value of mindfulness, because it's a beautiful assist in coming back to a calmer mind and body. We're also going to talk about hypnosis and to use a sense of control through hypnosis for managing how we deal with all sorts of things. And I'm going to teach you about bilateral stimulation. Anytime we do things which cross the midline, it allows the brain to calm down in the neurological system. And so there are different ways to do this. It's called bilateral stimulation, really easy. So these techniques we're going to talk about. Email me if you're interested and I can send you a flyer, no problem. And the first 20 people that sign up will get a free 20-minute consultation to support them in managing their stress or their trauma or their grief or their loneliness or their isolation to whatever extent you wish.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I do not see your email in the chat, so we will make sure that that gets sent out to everybody. And again, the handouts are on the homepage of the conference.
I'm going to
I think it is time for the closing ceremony of the conference. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Jeffrey and thank all of you for participating today. And it's great to see we had a lot of participants in this group, up to 92 at some point. So that's wonderful. So there is an evaluation that you can fill out as well, but please go right to the closing ceremony if you're planning on participating in that. And thank you for spending time with us today. And thank you again, Jeffrey.
It was so fun and so fast. Let's do it again. Blessings to you all.
Before I dump everyone out, I'm gonna post Jeffrey's email very quickly right here for everyone. And I'll give you a second, and then, is that correct? I don't know, hopefully that's the correct one.
JJ,
Yeah, JJ.
jjwork@gmail.com.
Exactly, right. It's so much easier just to tell everybody. And
Yes.
my number is 651-698-0768. A real pleasure to be with you all, and many blessings.